morning, Peaceful Place friends. It feels so good to be back together again. This morning I am going to do a little bit of review with you from what we talked about last week, and then we are going to dive even deeper into the daffodil. Okay, so let's start with some review. Last week I showed you this little diagram of the whole daffodil, and today we're going to look at this part right here, the trumpet. Okay, so if you can remember, say the parts out loud with me. Are you ready? Okay. Do you remember what these were? They're the roots. What about this part? That's the bulb. What about these things that stick out of the bulb? Those are the leaves. And here we have the stem. And these right around here that surround the trumpet are the petals. And then we have the trumpet. Not that kind of trumpet. But today we are going to look inside, and I have some real daffodils right here, and we are going to zoom in on this part and see what's inside and see what we can learn from it. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. All right, friends, let's go into this daffodil flower. First, we're going to start by talking about this part that's right here on the outside. This is the thin protective layer that surrounds the bud and keeps it protected before the flower blooms. It is called the spathe. This is the spathe. And now that the flower is bloomed and it's done its job, it's starting to die and it's a little crunchy and just kind of hangs out on the flower. It doesn't serve a real purpose after the flower has bloomed. Set that over there. Okay. So now I'm going to clip the flower off of this part right here, which you remember is the stem. Put the stem over here, because we're not really going to talk about that much today, but we'll still be able to see it. Okay, so now we're going to start by taking the petals off of the flower and seeing how many there are. Let's see how many. Can you count with me? Last one is 6. Each daffodil has 6 petals. Even if they're tiny petals or very large petals, each daffodil has 6. Unless for some reason one broke off, but when they bloom with 6 petals. Alright, so now we're going to open up this part right here, which I think you remember is called the trumpet. So I'm going to make a little bit of a tear. I'm just going to peel it apart. And a little bit of this piece down here. Okay. I'm going to set this part down for a minute. Okay, so here we have the trumpet all spread out. And we can see that this stuff right here looks kind of fuzzy and it feels kind of like a powder is the pollen that rubbed off of one of the other parts we'll talk about onto the wall of the trumpet. Alright, so there's the trumpet all flattened out by the petals. Okay, so back to this part. In the center here, we have these little things. These are called the stamen. This is the male part of the plant, and on the tips it has the part that's called pollen. It's kind of like a fine powder, like if you have ever cooked with flour before. It kind of feels like a really soft flour. You can see it there on my finger a little bit. So we have the stamen. It's the part that makes the pollen. Let's see how many we have. We have 1 down there. We 2. We have 3. Oop, got stuck to my finger there. Let's get that out. Okay, there we go. 3. 4. 5. And 6. Now, each center of the daffodil has 6 stamen. 6 pieces that make the pollen at the end. And we have 6 petals. Very interesting, right? If you can see my fingers right now, they look really messy. I got a lot of pollen on my fingertips right now. Okay, so next we're going to talk about this big and tall piece right here. This part is called the pistil. And this is the female part of the flower. And when it sticks out, the top right here, where you can see, is where the pollen goes inside. And I should have showed you before, but this part is connected to the very, very center, which goes down into this part right here that we'll talk about later. But that part's very important. So, we have the pistil, and this is the part that takes in the pollen to create, goes down this long tube into the part of the flower I just showed you, and it makes more seeds. And the way that the pollen from the stamen get to the top of that pistil, because if you remember, they were shorter. So the way that the pollen gets to the tip of that stamen, or I'm sorry, that pistil, this is the pistil, is through pollination. And we will talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so this next part is pretty cool, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to see it in the camera when I open it up. If not, I will show a picture at the end and talk about it. But if we open up this part right here, this is called the seed pod. So remember when I mentioned last week that daffodils grow from a bulb, which they do, but that bulb has to come from somewhere, right? Let's see if I can get that up close. Oh wow, there we go. We can see that. So the seeds from the daffodil, after they get fertilized and the daffodil dies and falls to the ground, will plant more seeds. And from these seeds will come bulbs. But that takes about 5 years, which is a lot, which is older than some of you and about the age of some of you. And that's a long time to wait for a flower to bloom, right? So that's why people usually start with the bulb and plant it in the fall like we talked about. But these are the seeds. This is the seed pod. You can see all these little tiny seeds in there. Isn't that cool? These little tiny seeds are in this part that connects. And once this falls, like I said, it will create bulbs and daffodils. Okay, so do you remember what these parts are called? We just got thrown a lot of new words our way, didn't we? Let's review. So over here, you remember this guy, right? Yeah, that's the stem. Okay, so what about this guy? The thin protective layer that helps the bulbs, or the bud, I'm sorry, stay safe. It surrounds the bud. That's the spathe. And what about these things right here? There's 6 of them. Those are the petals. And we also learned about the petals last week. And then we opened up this part right here. Do you remember what that was called? That was the trumpet. That's right. And then what about these 6 little pieces that are at the very center of the flower? Do you remember what those are called? Those are called the stamen. The part that makes the pollen, right up there. And what about this guy right here? The one that stands up nice and tall. It's the pistil. That's right. And that's the part that receives the pollen that's on the tips of these to travel down to the seed pod and make more seeds. so that when the flower goes back into the ground after it's lived and shined its beautiful life, will help us make more. All right, well, thank you for going through the parts of the flower of the daffodil with me. That was really fun. All right, let's continue on. Here's a little clip I found to help us take a look at how that pollen gets from the stamen to the pistil so that the daffodil can reproduce and make more seeds. So here is a little video of a bee going in and out of all these daffodils. And when it does that, it helps move the pollen around enough so that it gets onto that pistil and can help make more seeds. Isn't that cool? All right, so now we are going to do a little bit of review since we got to look at a real daffodil and see the parts of the center that help reproduce and make more and more and more daffodils. So here I have a little diagram that I drew and labeled, and we're gonna go over the parts and see if you can remember with me. If not, that's okay. All right, so this one points to the part right here. Can you see it? Right there. Do you remember what that part was called? That is, let's see, the seed pod. That's the seed pod. Remember, that's where all those little seeds are. Next, we have this flap, and it's pointing to this part right here. Do you remember what that one was called? Let's see. That was the spathe. The spathe, and that was the thin protective layer that helps the bud of the daffodil before it blooms stay safe and protected. This part, we remember that, right? That one is the stem. Yeah. The stem of the flower. So now, let's go up here. This one's pointing to those beautiful things. There's 6 of them that surround the center. Do you remember what those are? I bet you do. Petals. The petals of the flower. All right, and now we have this flap, and it's pointing to that tall centerpiece that we opened up and saw. Do you remember what that one's called? Let me get a little bit closer to see if you can see it. This piece right there. That one is called the pistil. The pistil is the female part that receives the pollen. Great, now let's go to this flap down here. It's pointing to this part, the part that protects and surrounds the middle part that we just talked about. That is the trumpet. Good job. All right. And then our last flap down here is pointing to those parts of the center that had the fuzzy pollen on the end. Do you remember what those were called? Those were the male parts of the flower. And that is called the stamen. So now we have reviewed and talked about all the parts of the daffodil flower parts. And you'll be able to make one of these of your own at home. I'll have it attached in the email that is sent. Okay? All right. So, thank you for joining me today. I thought that we could end our time together with a story. So, let's get into a book. All right? Today we're going to read Curious George Visits a Toy Store. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. Today was the opening of a brand new toy store. George and the man with the yellow hat did not want to be late. When they arrived, the line to go inside was all the way around the corner. When a line is this long, it is not easy for a little monkey to be patient. George sneaked through the crowd. All he wanted was a peek inside. George got to the door just as the owner opened it. "This is no place for a monkey," she said. But George was so excited. He was already inside. Balls, dolls, bicycles, and games filled the shelves. There were so many toys. George didn't even know how some of them worked. And how about these hoops? What did they do? George was curious. He climbed up to pull one out of the pile. It would not move. George pulled harder. Still it wouldn't move. George pulled with all fours. Suddenly, there was a terrible crash. Blue, red, green, and yellow hoops bounced up and down and everywhere. "Look!" exclaimed a boy, bouncing up and down himself. "Why, I haven't seen one of these in years," said the boy's grandmother. She put a hoop around her waist and gave it a spin. George tried the hula hoop too. Then George pretended to be a wheel, and he rolled and rolled and... Oops! He rolled right into the owner. The owner shook her head. "I knew you were trouble," she said. "Now you've made a mess of my new store." Again she tried to stop George. And again, George was too quick. In only a second, he was around the corner and on the highest shelf. Below him, George saw a little girl point to a toy out of reach. "Mommy, can we get that dinosaur?" she asked. George picked up the dinosaur and lowered it to the girl. She was delighted. So was the small boy next to her. "Could you get that ball for me, please?" he asked George. George reached up, grabbed the ball, and bounced it to the boy. "May I have that puppet way over there?" asked another girl. How lucky that George was a monkey. He swung off the shelf, hung on to a light, picked up the puppet, and put it right into her hands. "What a show!" shouted a boy. The children held up their new toys and cheered. What a commotion! Immediately, the owner came running, and then came the man with the yellow hat. "I think we've had enough monkey business for one day," the owner frowned. Just then, a girl got in the long line to pay. "What a great store," she said. "What a great idea to have a little monkey helping you," her father told the owner. "I guess you're right," the owner replied and smiled. Then she gave a special surprise. "Thank you, George," she said. "My grand opening is a success because of you. Perhaps monkey business is the best business after all." The end. Thank you guys for joining me today in reading Curious George. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye!